Hi there, Darren here, and welcome to this session on J1V3 simulations on better buildings. So effectively, what do we do on the platform? Well, we go ahead and model what is called the reference building. We do that on your behalf based on your proposed geometry. You do have some input into that process, but it means that unlike standard processes where you have to go ahead and completely model a separate building and input all the reference buildings values represented by the deemed satisfied provisions, you don't do that on the platform because we do that for you. So let's dig into the National Construction Code for a second, and we can go ahead and see precisely what we're doing on your behalf. Here we are in J1V3, verification using a reference building, and effectively what we're doing is we're allowing folks to jump on and model certain building classes. That is our building class 3, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 and common areas of part of class 2 buildings. And effectively once you undertake an assessment and theoretically pass this assessment, you are deemed to comply with the provisions of J1P1. So scrolling up or left clicking would have been better. You can see the provisions of J1P1, which are not particularly useful, to be very honest, because they're mainly qualitative in nature. So the correct terminology is that you are deemed to meet these requirements, not specifically quantified to meet these requirements based on a numerical value representing minimum energy use. Maybe that's in time to come. Let's go ahead and make our way back down to J1V3. Here we are, and let's look at the details of exactly what's required. So first of all, we have the subject matter of greenhouse gas emissions. So on the platform, we're going to go ahead and calculate what is called a reference building for you. And effectively your processes are all around calculating or designing the proposed design. We take the geometry from the proposed design, generate a reference building with the deemed satisfied provisions against it, run a simulation for that reference building, and then run a simulation for your proposed design. Effectively, if the annual greenhouse gas emissions are equal to or less than the reference building in all states except for the ACT, which don't provide annual greenhouse gas emission targets, then effectively you've met the requirements of the code. We also have the provisions of thermal comfort, where a thermal comfort level of between a predicted mean flow of -1 to +1 must be achieved across not less than 95% of the total floor area of all occupied zones, conditioned zones, for not less than 98% of the annual hours of operation of the building. So we provide a scope to do that too. We effectively automatically check these provisions for you, and if you don't meet the requirements, then we go ahead and stipulate exactly how you can meet these requirements. Now, the big important step here, actually let me cover items 2 and then 3, and then we'll get into specification 34. Item 2 is really the annual greenhouse gas emissions of the proposed building. The building that you're designing may be offset by renewable energy that is generated and used on site. So we take that provision into account, and other processes such as reclaimed energy used on site, so that can all be included as a way to reduce your annual greenhouse gas emissions of your proposed building to theoretically make it less than the reference building. Those are subject to change moving forward. And the third provision there is the 2 parts. Part A, ASHRAE standard 140, that is the testing methodology that has been used to test both better building and the underlying simulation engine of EnergyPlus. So we've met those requirements. And the last one here is specification 34. So I'm just going to link straight through to specification 44 because this is really where the detailed approach is determined, which we mostly do on your behalf. So let's get into it. you have the reference building under section S34C2, and you have the proposed building and reference building under S34C3. For S34C2, the reference building, we're going to meet all of these requirements. Now, let's skip through them. First of all, for the reference building, we're going to make sure that the reference building is nominated with the deemed satisfied provisions for all relevant parts. We're going to nominate the minimum amount of ventilation required in your building as per part F6. We're going to make sure that the reference building has external walls that have a solar absorbance of 0.6. We're going to provide you with the functionality of making sure that the reference building, the air conditioning of the air conditioning must, for 98% of the annual hours of operation, must achieve between 18 and 25 degrees. So you can go ahead and toggle on and make sure that there's a check for that. There's a second part here. If the proposed building has no mechanically ventilated cooling or has mixed cooling, the air conditioning must have the same method of control and control set points for non-mechanical cooling as the proposed building. So we have a functionality for that. Next up, the reference building must have an infiltration rate in each zone, and it's equal to 0.7 air changes per hour throughout all zones when there is no mechanically supplied outdoor air. Okay, so no mechanically supplied outdoor air, it defaults 0.7. All other times, it defaults to 0.35. Effectively, that means when the building is occupied, we have 0.35 and 0.7 when it is not occupied. Fairly simple. Lighting must meet the maximum power densities provided in Part J7, so we have controls that enable you to do that. And minimum performance standards must be applied for services not covered by Parts J6 to J8. So that's kind of subject to your inputs, really. So that is the reference building. For the proposed, we have, proposed and reference building, which is where we have exactly the same information going into both. There is a long list of items that can be designed in. Now, I'm not going to go through each of these because it's too much information, but effectively what we can say is that you have the complete ability to model everything under S34C3 as required by your design and in accordance with this provision. So let's jump back to the platform now. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of confidence that we have you covered certainly for these two parts. For the services part, you can go ahead and model your own services should you wish, but most folk are only going down the proposed building and reference building pathway because they deemed to need to meet the building fabric performance requirements as opposed to needing to meet the services requirements. Services requirements are typically stipulated and complied with elsewhere outside J1V3. Doesn't mean you don't. It doesn't mean you can't do this over here, but we don't automate it for you. So it's a building fabric assessment only. Now back in the platform, let's go ahead and look at this model. So there's a bit of information going on in this model, but it's not overly complex. Now hopefully you saw the commercial, geometry commercial, where I built this model out for you, and you became a little bit familiar. It's really important that you reference that particular on-demand course, because that gives you insight into this model, and it's going to provide you insight into lots of other courses that I deliver, because effectively I don't want to repeat the same information time and time again. But let's have get a quick flavor of what's going on here. So what did we do? Well, we had ground levels, we had voids, first and second floor levels, and a third floor level. They were distributed across these levels here, so ground, void. We had two first and second floors, so this was just duplicate. And then we had that third floor there. So really the only difference between over here in the drawings and over here is that we've duplicated first and second floor. And if we wanted to go ahead and duplicate that many times, that we could, but we're going to leave it there. And that's enough of the explanation for that. From a tagging perspective, we had a bunch of tags that were applied to the model for curtain walls, for window walls, for punch windows, a couple of different types of wall systems. And then we had a space type as well actually distributed in the model, and we've also got shading distributed by the tagging. So let's go ahead and have a quick look at these. Curtain wall, window wall, they're both windows. So if we navigate down to windows, we'll see that we have the curtain wall, the window wall, and the punch windows. So these are all nominated with their solar heat gain coefficients and solar heat and U values. And we have, for the walls, we have the two wall systems here, just nominated with total R values, solar absorptance for the proposed design. For the roofs, we had a complete generic roof, so we didn't bring in any further information into the roofs here. We left it as a generic concept roof with a total R value of 3 and a solar absorptance of 45 or 0.45 if you should like. For the floors, we just nominated slab on ground with a total R value of 1. And for the external floors, so those would be floors that would be cantilevering above the first ground level, maybe popping out. And I believe we do have one in the model there somewhere. I'll generate the 3D view in order to see where that is, but that would be nominated with a total R value of 2. The internal floors, do we have one there? Maybe I was wrong. I was just thinking there that we might have one. We don't have a external floor cantilevering out, but that's what it would represent, and that's where that information would be distributed to. For the internal floors, these are all at 0.3. Skylights, we have a default skylight there, but we don't actually have any skylights in the model. I believe there was a skylight at one point. If you have glazed doors, you have glazed doors. If you have opaque doors, you have opaque doors. And if you have shading, like we have lots of shading here, you can see it distributed here. So I'm just going to go ahead and I might just turn off that horizontal shading there. And the only reason I'm doing that is just to provide a simpler, quicker simulation. Now, the important things, I guess, to understand when it comes to J1V3 is that if we're going to be running this J1V3 sim here, we're going to be running it against a bunch of provisions, and we don't have renewables actually on this one. Let me see. I don't think we had renewable. Oh no, we did too. Bear with me for a second. I just want to see if we do have renewables. I don't think we have anything drawn here. So by renewables, what I mean is PV. So I'm going to pop on a PV array quickly here. Just drop that in there like that. Just going to call that PV. Really pop it in very simply and determine maybe a few little values here that would be useful. I'm going to put on I'm going to bring down the surface coverage and the lead to self-efficiency at 20%. So it's effectively generating an estimated system size of 34.7. Hit save, and then that will now appear and be usable in the JV3 sim to offset the greenhouse gas emissions in this particular example, which happens to be in Brisbane. So there's the PV there now. That's been popped onto the top of the building there. Hopefully you can see that nice and easy, just there on the right. And let's go ahead and have a look at a few other things that you're going to want to consider. So the version of EnergyPlus doesn't make a difference. If you were to look at some optimization in different climates, I'm going to show you where to look at that in a second. For your step sizes, arguably you could bring this to a step size of every 60 minutes. That's fine. You don't necessarily need 15 minutes, but it can make a difference to thermal comfort calcs. So we generally leave it to every 15 minutes. Should you want to change the solar distribution, i.e. bring in a more accurate approach for shading, then you're going to do it here. We default to full exterior. Full exterior with reflections mean that your calculation is going to run much longer, but it's going to be more accurate in terms of your solar distribution for your model. And for the minimal shadowing, that's going to effectively just reduce the model to its simplest assumption for solar distribution. Please bear in mind that when you're setting solar distribution, it is going to make a significant impact to the simulation time of your model. Now, before I jump into more specific J1V3 features, I'm just going to mention that your climate data sets are assumed based on I guess the 2007 to 2021 climate data sets provided by CSIRO. Should you want to change your location, you certainly can. You can just change it there. But let's jump into the reference building. So, the reference building, the most important part of the process is that you are really comparing to the set of assumptions here. Now, when you're looking at these set of assumptions, effectively what you're looking at is a list of things that people have pointed out or desired or wanted over time. And they relate to arguably grey areas or decision-making processes for the reference building that you may want to set. So, first of all, in terms of the reference building fabric, we do have some hover-overs here which are useful. So, this particular option identifies whether to use single aspects values, method 1, or multiple aspect method 2 for the reference building. So that might make a small difference. It's up to yourself. It's deemed as being a grey area by some. Next, the combined window fraction. So when active, the window fraction is calculated once for the whole building. When inactive, the window fraction is calculated per building class, and that's what we default to, excluding skylights. When active, skylights are removed from the reference building. When inactive, skylights are present in the reference model. Next up, control thermostat. When active, reference building zones use either a thermostat of 21 to 24 degrees when a conditioned space is nominated, or 18 to 25 when a transitory space is nominated. And transitory spaces might be nominated for a corridor space, for example, and that might mean a number of things. Particularly if it's a transitory space, you won't need to meet the thermal comfort requirements in that space because it's not a conditioned space where you are deemed to need to meet thermal comfort requirements. For shading multipliers, when you're undertaking a reference building, there are deemed to satisfy shading coefficients provided, which are very, very simple in nature. And you may want to default to those in your reference building because they are deemed to satisfy provisions, and that is what needs to be represented by the reference building. But you can go ahead and simulate actual shading multipliers for the reference building should you want to do that. You most probably don't, but you have the ability to do so. We also have an overhang detection, and that's really just allowing folks to go back to a legacy version of overhangs, but by definition this allows you to choose how the overhangs are determined. For the purpose of the deemed satisfy and reference building workflows, we recommend just setting it to horizontal, where building surfaces throughout the model are collated and ranked for each window to determine the projection and height with the most impact for shading purposes. Next up, window methods. So window methods, how to calculate the reference glazing calculations performed. We automatically do this based on a rule set where we set the solar heat gain coefficient as the largest value allowed, and then the U value set to the largest value allowed. So effectively one sets the other. And then you can also manually determine the solar heat gain coefficient, which may determine an alternative U value. And that's completely up to yourself. We do not recommend anyone change this, because it means that you end up in workflows that are a bit convoluted, and there is no reason to change this, because the workflow that we've set up here should represent a repeatable, structured workflow where the reference building glazing assumptions really never change. If you jump between the two, then you'll find yourself really picking and choosing, and effectively in a scenario where you're arguably making the reference building worse to meet the performance requirements of the code. You typically don't need to do that. And then there are a few backstops, or what we call backstops. So for the wall R values, when active, this feature here uses the backstop wall R values exclusively. When inactive, uses proposed wall R values if greater than the backstop. So normally set to activated there. Roof solar absorbance, when active, uses the backstop roof solar absorbance exclusively. When inactive, uses proposed roof solar absorbance if less than the backstop. You know, there's lots of stuff here that is, I guess, collated over time, as the introduction to this section suggested. So if you're really not too bothered about it or unclear about it, you really can just leave everything to the defaults, and that's what most folk will do. If you want to account for those max illumination power densities, you certainly can, and we'll extract the values from table J 6.2a, and I'm not sure if that is an old reference or not, but we will automatically determine the illumination power densities for you, so all you got to do is toggle that on, and that is that done. And then the final one here for fixed skylights, so when active determines a maximum that is incorrect. I haven't seen that before, but there you go. We haven't updated that there. But effectively, what does that do? A fixed skylight area to 5% per zone. It does exactly what it says it's going to do. If it's toggled on, it's going to fix each skylight area to the 5% per zone for the reference building. When toggled off, it's going to ignore that rule set. So there you go. That is the crux of the reference building. Once you have gone ahead and agreed on what the reference building represents, and you've stipulated the inputs for your proposed design, then you can effectively go ahead and run some simulations. Now I'm just going to double check here. So what we have here is actually a Class 9B building. So most of this design is a Class 9B building. And of course the whole design is in Climate Zone 2, which is in Brisbane. I have used additional tagging for a different building class, just happens to be an office. And let's go ahead and find out where I pop those in. There they are. So effectively everything that is grey is 9B, and everything that is purple are offices. So this is just for example purposes only. And I'm going to go ahead and start running a simulation just like that. So that's now running as a project like this, of this size, which isn't too big. It's got a few zones in it. Might take anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes. Depends on how much shading is involved in the design. That's going to be the largest determining factor as to how long things take. Because of the size of this one, I believe we're going to, I need to run this through our credit system. And that is just because the total size is either above 10,000 square meters or above 100 zones, I think it is. So once this is run, I'm going to go ahead and run the sim, and we can go ahead and have a look at the results. Okay, and let's just call this test building. Okay. What we do recommend is that for folks that don't want to go down this route of using credits, and we don't encourage anyone to use these credits. Once you're using the credit system allows you to run calculations significantly faster than any desktop will do, because they're running on our very powerful servers based in Sydney. You could reduce the size of your model. You could run partial model sizes. the reason they exist is effectively that a browser has only so much memory, and if you start to run large models, you'll be impacted by lagging in your browser. So we don't want that to occur. So we've got this system where you can run them in the cloud, so to speak, and once they're complete, you'll get an email into your inbox, and that will tell you that your inputs are ready to review and to qualify whether they're first correct, and second, what needs to change in terms of the design. Now, just as that's running, I'm just going to double check a couple of things here. Just going to note that I've just realized, and this is probably a good test case here, is that the model that I've run is got a HVAC system only connected to the default space. So I'm going to run another one in a second, and we're going to add on a second space here. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. We'll leave the first one run, that's fine. I'm just going to set up a VRF system. This is normally fine for most projects, and it's going to have a couple of condensers on it. We don't need to model it like that, but I've just chosen to model it like this. So we now have the 9B, which is the default space, and the office in play. And that means that both inputs here for the default and inputs for the office, which do change as you go from one to the other, are going to be fed into that model. All other inputs pertaining to design, such as the infiltration that I spoke about earlier, are all, they're all going to be adopted for you. You can adopt your set points here. You can adopt sizing assumptions. You can look at those schedules associated to the HVAC. All of this makes a difference because often this can impact the comfort in the space, and that can result in a compliant or non-compliant outcome. So let me go ahead and rerun that now. You're not going to have to wait because we're going to stick this on pause for a second while both of those are running. But this is something that you could theoretically do as well as you go through your designs. You could start running iterations of your designs very quickly, kind of sequence them so they kind of all batch process, so you can look at them all at once and look at you might want to look at the difference between solar heat gain coefficients for design A, B, C, D, and E, window heights, etc. This could be used for many reasons. That's begun now. So I'm going to come back in a few minutes, wait for those to simulate, and we can talk about the results. Okay, so here are the results. So we ran two assessments, test building, speckle test 2. I'm going to jump into speckle test 2, and let's go and see what the summation is. So if we cast our mind back, at the beginning of this session, we started to look at the National Construction Code in terms of building emissions, so it's greenhouse gas emissions and thermal comfort. They were the two key requirements to meet the code's performance requirements. And then they are stipulated here right at the front under summary. So under summary, you will find effectively what is produced as a report on the platform. Lots of information about all the inputs. Okay, so this is all important to check. You absolutely have to check this, go through this with a fine-tooth comb to make sure all the inputs are correct. And once you do so, you can then go into building emissions, thermal comfort, and assess whether you accept the outcomes here. Okay, so I'll just talk to these for a little bit. Now, when it comes to meeting these performance requirements, we kind of resolve them as a rule set against a accepted criteria. So in the case of building emissions, the reference building or the annual supplied emissions must be less than 42.83 kilograms meter squared kilograms per CO2 equivalent per meter squared. So that's our target value. That's the value represented by the reference building. And then we've got the area. So this is the area that was undertaken, happens to be 5,454 meters squared. And then we've got the simulated building. This is the proposed design here. So effectively we're comparing this value against this value, so 42.83 against 45.23, in order to establish whether the accepted criteria has been met. And here we see a statement, not meeting the accepted criteria, meaning that effectively our reference building emissions are higher, or are higher than our proposed. Now you can dig into more information here pertaining to this, and you can see as you scroll down here, greenhouse gas emissions have been nominated as 254 kilogram per kilojoule for electricity and 51.53 for natural gas, and those are set across the platform for you, so they're referenced from the code itself. And then as you scroll further down, you can see we added on some PV onto the design, and then we can see that that has been, that's been taken into account. How much was produced? So we produced 42.997.6 kilowatt hours of electricity. We utilized 44, and we purchased 269, and the surplus, which was sent back to the grid, which was not utilized, and that would be to do with the occupancy schedule of the building, would have been 8,942 kilowatt hours. So this provides you with a way of reading effectively what the greenhouse gas emission outcomes are. The same is true for when you navigate to thermal comfort. You have an acceptance criteria. Again, if we cast our mind back, the criteria was 95% of the total area across the assessed zones had to meet specific requirements, which happened to be a PMV of between -1 and +1 for at least 98% of hours when above 20% occupancy. And in this case, 99.8% achieved this requirement, so we met the criteria. And if we didn't, we wouldn't see so many crosses within this table. Now this is quite a long table, but we wouldn't see as many crosses. And if we navigate all the way down to the bottom, you actually can see some ranking based on the PMV. Maybe we can see there's a couple of colder spaces, the so-called grinding space, reception area. These are low, but not so low as to be a problem, because they're not below the 1. They're between 0.5 or minus 0.5 and -1. We have a few on the upper end, but they're not too high to be a problem either. Now we have some non-transitory zones as well. So that was produced as a function of leaving that toggle on. So to meet the acceptance criteria, 100% of the total areas across the assessed zones must meet the conditions between 21 and 24 for at least 98% when above 20%. We can see that in this case where quite a lot are not meeting this criteria. So we tend not to see this function used as much, but it's there should you want to see it. And then finally the reference building claims and calculation. So if you really wanted to get into what the reference building represents, so this is the facade calculator. Okay, so this is exactly what the facade calculator has been replaced with, an automated process where we then tabulate the results for you. So this is exactly what the facade calculator is. The facade calculator does not need to be used in this process in any way. It's the calculations behind it that need to be used, and you can see in this process that we have results for building class 9B and for building class 5. Why? Because both of these building classes have been utilized in the model, and if you had 10 different building classes in here, you're going to, if set up to do so, you're going to get elemental reference glazing calculations for each of those building classes. But before any of that makes sense, we've got to engage with what the inputs are. So I thoroughly recommend this process. First of all, what I recommend is that you go into your proposed design and you find the geometry tab. Once you do so, you'll get a breakdown of your wall types, your floor types, ceilings, roofs, windows, opaque doors, zone areas. You'll get a form factor, a treated floor area, and a window to wall ratio. All of this should be reflective of what you understand the inputs of your model to be. Once you go to thermal envelope, you'll see a big green blob. That big green blob should represent the conditioned space within your model. If you see areas that are not green, and they should be, then you're probably missing some inputs, or they are incorrect. If you choose to look at the model elementally, you can go ahead and look at the model like this. So if I look at this model elementally, I can start to see the difference in wall performance, external, internal, floor performance. I'll stop there for a second. That has an R value of 0.3, where the floor has an R value of 1. Ceiling, this happens to be a cold roof system here, so we can see the ceiling has a total R value of 3. Is that correct? Is it not? That's a construction total R value. That is up to you to resolve. The roof here, in this case, we actually have a flat roof system versus a metal roof here, and under that metal roof there we have the insulation, so we don't really care so much about the blue roof here, but this roof here we do, and this here, because these are part of the roof construction that bound the thermal envelope. Windows, you're going to go ahead and check all of those windows elementally as well, and make sure that they are all correct in your model before you can pay any attention to really what's going on here. What we can see here is that we have a lot of internal doors as well, and that might seem curious to you. Why have they got internal doors? Well, that's likely to do with using this model for other purposes, and that could be an airflow network where you might be undertaking a more detailed assessment of this space, where you need to have some level of control over internal apertures, and in this case I'm going to call an internal aperture a door. So once you're happy with all of this information here, geometry, this is your first point of call. Yeah, you're happy with all the definitions that have been called up here, the R values, the U values, the solar absorbance values, etc. Then you're going to double check your site, make sure you're happy with the site, and if you want to go ahead and look at the climate data, you can. You can go ahead and Google that if you like, and you'll be able to grab that should you ever want to do that. And then we can then start paying attention to really what's in the models. So actually, before I proceed, I will just say that if we're looking at the proposed design. If you ever want to look at the reference design, all you've got to do is toggle. Okay, so when you're in the view that you want to toggle over to the reference, you just click reference, and you will see the resultant reference inputs versus the proposed. So this is the proposed here. I'm going to click view reference. This is the reference, okay? So you can always toggle at any point to see the difference between the two. And even if we go to energy here, for example, where we can start to talk a bit more about results, where you can toggle from the reference to the proposed, the reference to the proposed, and then you're going to see a consequential change in the numbers presented here, which just happen to be the energy side of things for kilowatt hours per meter squared, just divided by that number there, and peak kilowatt there, and the time of day, or the time of day and year that peak kilowatt occurred. So should you want, you can go through both of these and check them out, and you can do the same, exactly the same for other elements as well. Electricity here, you can go through that. That's the electricity demand, and what you're looking for here is to see that do these peaks correlate to the schedule that you have applied across your model, and they should correlate to a peak in usage between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. for some reason. They should fundamentally make sense and come back to what your inputs are. You can look at heating electricity, cooling electricity, you can dive down into all your plant electricity, lighting loads, equipment loads, everything that you would expect to need to understand the model and agree with the model should be presented here. By the time you get into zones, you can start looking at fundamentals of the model on a zone by zone basis. So you could go ahead and select each zone. You could go ahead and copy the data out for each zone in an Excel format, even in an image format should you want. Grab the raw numbers or transpose them, and you'll be able to get an understanding of what's happening in the space. And this provides a quick way of seeing what's happening here. So I'm just selecting an internal space there. We can see that sure, we've got roof losses and roof gains, and we've got some infiltration, and we've got wall losses, and that's about it. We don't have anything else because we don't have, that's not a conditioned space, that one. But if we go here, we've got a lot more information in the model, and it's actually showing that, yeah, the glazing is significant there. The floor losses are quite significant. What else we've got? People is a big contribution, equipment less so, lighting less so, but we can see that the cooling is being driven up significantly, and hovering over these images allow you to see the resultant monthly energy flow in kilowatt hours per meter squared. You can jump into each zone should you wish and get a view of zone solar loads, and these will obviously change as you go around the model. You can look at the heat flows through walls, depicted here as blue to red, with the blue showing a large amount of heat loss and the red showing a large amount of heat gain. All of this is super useful substantiation across the model, and you're going to want to see this information to understand that the model is doing what it's supposed to do. In this example window, we can see here that we're getting a heat gain of 80.61 in this lower window here, but up here it's double, it's over double, because this window is protected by that building there, this one is exposed. So all of that is useful information in order for you to substantiate any design changes that you may propose as a result of seeing this information. Once we get into more of the details on zones, if you find yourself in a challenging thermal comfort scenario, then you may find yourself under zones looking at thermal comfort and looking for spaces that are either too hot or too cold. So at that point you might see a depiction of blue showing too cold and red showing too hot, and here in this space here it feels like it's on the verge of potentially getting too hot in this space. It meets the requirements of the code, but could potentially be a little bit warm. I'm going to go into air temperatures now just to serve that point, and I can see that the air temperatures in that space, we do have air temperatures above 24, and if we look at operative temperatures, there's quite a few operative temperatures above 24, but they're probably being clamped down by the set points within those spaces. Subject to the HVAC systems that we have nominated, carbon dioxide can be a really useful measure as well. I would say though that you've got to make sure that you have your model set up correctly in order to ascertain any value from carbon dioxide. And in this model, I've really just left it to the defaults for J1V3. And finally, should you want to go ahead and start looking at HVAC and looking at flow rates and design loads, you can absolutely do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You can dive into a whole heap of data that comes through the JV3 process that we've intended to make more useful, that is potentially not normally used or utilized, but absolutely can be, subject to how well you've set up your HVAC system. And this is where really an exploration of JV3 allows you to actually utilize the model in a much more detailed way and make it generally far more useful. Once you're happy, then really this result then becomes your guide. If it is exactly as you expect it to be from a design perspective, then you're really left with one final quest, which is going to download this report. Now, strictly speaking, this report is a performance solution against the National Construction Code. It is a verification method. The verification method happens to be a performance solution. So if you were to print this off directly as it is with no theme attached to it, a theme is a branded overlay of our reports where you can add in your own branding, colors, logos, etc. Then this is just going to be produced as a performance based design brief as required by the code. We strongly recommend that you go ahead and add in any metadata into your reports, from modeler experience to who the building owners are, who the project managers are, anything that defines and clarifies the intent of the JV3 or J1V3 model. Fire it in here, because this is going to make it much clearer that you, the practitioner, knows exactly what they're talking about, and it will be received as intended, as in a high quality report. For those that don't want to go down this route, please bear in mind that you can copy out everything from the platform. Okay, so we certainly don't expect everyone to want to use our reports. We understand other people or folks have their own needs for reporting, and if you do, then fantastic. You can go ahead and grab all of this information straight out. So what I personally find is that, I've gone through a piece of work. Hey, I just want to flick this over, copy this into an email, pop this into a consultant's advice note, that sort of thing, where someone doesn't need to see a report of this description coming through, because, at the end of the day, they're likely to read the first few bits and want to understand whether the design meets the performance requirements of the code. And if that's all you need to do, then you could go ahead and just grab it out there, and you could even just copy it out there into your own process, completely up to yourself. You could even download our PDF and convert it into a Word document, which is very easy to do now, and grab the information there, or update the report directly. There you go, that's it. There's a lot to J1V3. This was intending to set you up to model a project. I will be going into more details in terms of thermal comfort optimization in another on-demand course very soon. But until then, best of luck with it. Don't forget to undertake the quiz at the end, and if you want to use those certificates of completion or certificates of competency to show how competent you are, throw them into your CV, onto LinkedIn, whatever you want to do, you can do it. And that's available once you have met that 80% pass mark. Thanks a million for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.